we'll just roll right into it. We got Damien Hall. It was Serendipity Guru Nation that we reached out to. Somebody posted, and sorry, I'm like not prepared because this was on the whim, and Damien
Yeah,
said yes. Like I was expecting like 80% no, not today, but it worked out. I actually had a patient that didn't show up for a visit, so I stayed home longer. Um, and and Damien, I read this LinkedIn post. They said, hey, Damien really showed me what it takes to get in Black Pharma. We're gonna get into all that, and I looked into it. I'm like, yeah, I actually know this guy. I've been talking to him. We know the same people. We know Dr. Hazen. He got his start at Seagull Institute in Florida, which when I was building my site, South Coast Clinical Trials, back in the early 2000s, was like the model for CNS sites. Damien started out as a medic. Like, thank you so much, Damien, for coming on.
yeah. Thank you, as you mentioned. But this is clinical research 101, right? You always have to pivot, right?
Always. And wait, by the way, look, I promised Viva sponsor this show is sponsored by Viva. Thank you so much, Viva. Have you ever worked with Viva, Damien?
I have. I have worked with Vivas. So
Ah, what do you
yeah.
think? Put you on the spot here. You could say it
You know
bad
what?
if you don't like
I
it.
think you know what? I think that Viva is a fantastic system because it can serve multiple purposes. I know that most people know it from like, ETMF, but I know that they're also getting into the CTMS space, which I think it's kind of honestly long overdue. And I like it because, when I've used it, um, it's it's a really good tool because like things when people are uploading documents, if the document isn't uploaded right or the naming convention isn't right, it will reject it, and you can set it up to where it's really user friendly. So I'm a very pro Viva.
That's awesome. Yeah, they've been. I mean, that's where they earn their revenues from sponsors and CROs for sites. They're giving out eReg for free to sites.
Wow.
Sites.viva.com. If anyone's out there wants to start a site or has a site, you can just get your own EISF for free from Viva. They're playing the long game. They know that all those tools you mentioned earlier, Damien, that CRAs and sponsors use, they know that they're going to do better long term if they could get more sites to adopt the front end of it by empowering sites, helping sites do their jobs better as far as managing EISF. We have ours at my site, Yuma Clinical Trials. I'm hiring a new staff member Monday. She's going to be trained. One of the first things is how to manage upload files on the ESF. And what you were saying, you just check a box on certain things and it will passively move over to the sponsor's TMF. So no more monitoring, needing to ask sites to remind them about things. So thank you, Viva, sites.viva.com. Damien's a CRA. He knows all about asking sites for things.
So, yeah, well, so that was one of the other things. So I am now in the management side of things. So using Viva and things like clue points. And so it actually leads me to a quick question, because obviously, you have been, among the forefront in addition to clinical trials, but really helping people get into the industry, right? Do you foresee, Viva's kind of progression as a result of the industry progression where look from a CRA perspective, there was a point in time where CRAs would go out to the sites, pull paper, and you file one, you send one to data management, you keep one in the source. And then
Hmm.
we went to the whole ECRF thing, right? And I
Yep.
think, for good, bad, or indifferent, I think that what COVID kind of showed was that you might not really need as many monitoring visits as thought on site. So do you think that, with some of Viva's expansion, that it's to really cater to
Mm.
assisting the monitors in the remote, and CRAs, sponsors, and most importantly, sites in the remote space because it can be kind of the bridge.
Yes. So the short answer is yes. The long answer is, I think this is like a parallel to patient centricity. So in patient centricity, the whole idea is let's give the patient the option. Do they want to come into the site today? Do they have to? Can they do it from home? I think the same thing we're empowering sites. So site centricity. So does the CRA have to come do this visit in person today or can she do remotely? And it just happened last week. We use eSource and eReg. e-source powered by Creo. Viva doesn't do e-source yet, but there's rumors out there, people talking. But e-reg. So our CRA asked, "Hey, do you mind if I just do a remote visit?" And this was convenient for her in this case, but it was
Mm,
also convenient for us. We say, "Yeah, we always prefer our CRAs. They don't bug us. They do it from home. They'll come in when they have to do IP accountability, when they have to give us a pep talk, when they want to meet face to face, because FaceTime still matters. But it doesn't have to be every 4 to 6 weeks anymore." So yes, the answer is yes.
I see. And, for me, one of the questions I've always wanted to ask you is what was it about, or what is it about our industry that you decided to want to do something that is much bigger than you? Because as you know, getting in industry is tough.
Yeah.
And, as it relates to the role I have at Black Pharma, which, by the way, is a UK based organization to help people get into industry. And so, myself, along with, I believe it was Alexandra Goolsby who reached out to you, who had posted that. And I have
There you go.
another mentee. And for her being Alexandra, she's looking to get into the pharmacovigilance regulatory space, which I think, and realizing that it's even harder to get into that than it is the CRA space, because it's
Sure.
something where it requires some experience, but she is willing to learn. I mean, um, by the way, if you have not purchased Dan's books or listened to his podcast, I highly suggest you
Ah,
do.
thank you,
It's
man.
great. It is a great window into clinical research, and also just the good in the industry. Because I mean, listen, with Elizabeth Holmes and things like that, sometimes I think pharma gets the industry gets a black eye, but it is, there
Mhm.
are people like Dan out here that are really, trying to help people, have a fantastic career and a fantastic profession.
We're trying to. Thank you, Damien, and shout out to Alexandria. I mean, I knew that's the person who set this up. Thank you so much for setting this up. You don't even realize it, but you did, because this morning you tagged me and Damien in the same post. And this is someone that's been showing up on my radar lately, just providing value to other people. I see you guys out there. I'm on LinkedIn a lot. So I see like it's providing value. There's many like this in the industry that are reaching out. For me, it started out not altruistic at all, Damien. I would love to say it did. It started out, I was creating content for patients. I wanted patients to come to my site. And I read this book by Gary Vaynerchuk called Crush It, where
Yep.
he said, if you make video about who you're trying to target, they're going to come. So I made videos like, what's a consent form? What is an IRB? And no patients were watching. It was just other researchers. And they were asking me things like, "Hey, I just got hired. I don't know what to do." Or sometimes they would say, "I want to work as a CRA." So then I pivoted my content within 6 months. And ever since then, it's been for the industry. But it started out like selfishly, man. I was trying to get patients for my site, but I
I see.
pivoted.
Nice. And I mean, actually, a really quick story. Back, I think in the mid 2000s, I think I reached out to you because it was this interesting time in the industry where um, companies were not really hiring, and you actually took the time to review my CV, and you were like, "Wait, dude, you have a lot of oncology experience. Like, take this out, do this, expand on this, shorten that," and it helped. It was actually it led me to getting an opportunity at Shire before we were acquired by Takeda.
Wow.
Yeah,
Wow.
and so thank you for that. And
No problem, man. I didn't realize that. With the Shire, with the whole Vyvanse blockbuster, then Takeda acquired them, and then that paved the way for Travis Mickle, the lead scientist there with ChemFarm.
yep.
And now they're going through stuff. This stuff is just cycles, man. And now you're helping others get in the industry. I love
Yeah.
this.
Well, for me, the a side note is I have an interesting background. For me, I'm originally from Detroit,
Mhm.
and from a place 8 Mile in Wyoming. If you're familiar, you know. And I was one of the more fortunate ones to come from a two-parent home, and my dad, who was in the army, he was in the army at a time when obviously the country, it was what it was, right? Served his country, couldn't even get a job. He was a medic in the 101st Airborne Division.
Mm.
Couldn't get a job in the hospitals because, just like I said, just the times, even in a place like Detroit. So, uh, he worked, for the city, had odd jobs, and then he became a truck driver. And that job relocated us to a town in Ohio, which was a suburb of Cleveland, where we dealt with like real racism, not the stuff where people just say stuff. And I mean, we had things happen like my sister and I, when we'd walk to the bus stop, people, adults, would make it a point in their morning to take raw pieces of meat and toss it at my sister and I, and just a whole bunch of horrible things. And
When
this
was
was,
this?
huh?
When was this?
Oh, this was the early '80s.
Wow.
Yeah, and so where I'm going with this was that when you're young, you don't understand like sacrifice and being put in a position to pivot. A word we use a lot in industry. And so I joined the Navy, got out, and actually was looking to go to PA school in Miami. Ran into a friend of mine who was like, "Hey, this company Siegel Institute is looking for study coordinators." I'm like, "What's that?" He was like, "Wait, you know how to
Seagull. This is
you know
how
how
we get into Seagull. That's
yeah, so
awesome.
yeah, and
Wait. So Navy. So how'd you end up from Ohio to Miami? You were because of the Navy?
well, no, so what happened was I actually so after I got out of the Navy, I worked for the University of Michigan for a little bit, and then I got a job working for Orlando Regional Medical Center as an advanced
Okay.
clinical technician. And because of my experience drawing blood, doing EKGs, chest tubes, all of this stuff, we were in Orlando. And what a lot of people don't know is, I think now it's called the physician associate profession, but it used to be called physician's assistants. Navy corpsmen founded the profession of PAs. So,
Really?
yeah, so if you ask any PA, they have to learn about Eugene Steed, who was a physician at Duke University and used Navy corpsman as his first assist in surgery, and then just through time and education progression, the profession was born. So at the time, Miami-Dade College, they had a PA program, and I was down there, and you know, obviously needed a job, and just happened to be in a Foot Locker down in what do you call it? I think it's Biscayne Bay. I think it is,
Okay.
or Bayside. Bayside. Sorry. And you ever see somebody and you know them from somewhere, but you just don't know. So
Yeah, it
anyway,
happened to me on LinkedIn with you today.
yeah, right. So so long story short, so me and this guy were looking at each other. We know we knew each other, and come to find out, we were both stationed in Hawaii, and and I played basketball, and he played basketball, and so anyway, he was the one who said, "Listen, there's this company in Florida that they need study coordinators," and so I was able to get a job there, and it was Siegel Institute is a fantastic place. I mean, I have so much love for Bonnie, and
And what year was this when you started? Like when you
oh, like
started
2004,
Okay,
2000.
so you started right around the same time I did more or less.
Yeah, and
Okay.
was able to really do some amazing things, and I think that for me, I think the successes that I've had, whether it be a CRA or a site study manager or whatever, has been because of that experience at Siegel Institute. Because when you understand the site dynamic, I think as a CRA, one, sites kind of welcome it. But when you get into the clinical trial management part, it also helps when you have to have discussions with the site, because you know the dynamic versus
Mhm.
coming in and kind of trying to cause whole left side paralysis because they're not entering data. Because as when you're a monitor, you realize it just as you're leaving and you've left queries for the site. Here comes two other monitors with with things. So it's really helped me not only in the management but even the development. So again, back to the sacrifice part. Clinical research has allowed me to travel the world. One of the crowning moments for me was I got an opportunity to actually work for an oncology-based company in Munich, Germany. So I was actually in Munich, and it was, it was a great opportunity because, as you probably know better than most, when you have global studies and you see like EC, you're like, oh, okay, that's the ethics committee. But when you're actually in Europe and you realize that each country kind of has its own like FDA, if you will, it becomes really fascinating. And also the approach to the science is a little bit different. So clinical research has blessed me in so many ways. And for me, I always feel it's important to give back. And so through Black Pharma, I was able, to really to do that because again, they're a UK based organization. But Jennifer and the team there, they had enough trust in me to say, hey, we actually have some people in the US that could use, your experience. And so that's how, Alexandra and the other person, that's how we got connected. And from day one, I highly recommend it that they listen to you, and they actually they do follow you, they do listen, and things like that. And as a matter of fact, I'm going to purchase two of your books for them, because I think one thing about clinical research is I don't think that there's one way to get in, but I think when you do get in, it's important that you have an avenue, because as you probably know, again, I mean, look at how you ascended, right? I mean, clinical research, you can do so many things now versus when I started in 2004. you know
Yeah. And the opportunities are there. By the way, this serendipity today, all right? I woke up today, we both chose serendipity. I actually have to go to UPS store and send two books to two people. So just send me their addresses. I'll save you the trip. I'll say this is from Damien and I'll send it to them. I'll just put two more in there. I got a
oh,
box. I got a box full of books.
oh, beautiful, beautiful. I will definitely, I will definitely do that. And and I think that this is one thing that, I don't know, maybe this is a question for you. Like, do you feel that we network well in industry? Because I mean, I know industry is almost incestuous. It's not as big as people assume. Do you think that we network well enough to where if you recognize a diamond in the rough, that there's enough networking happening to where people will be willing, like, are there more danceteras in the world in our industry, or do you find that it's hit or miss?
It's hit or miss. If you compare it to something that a lot of people, I guess, can understand, like real estate, right? Realtors are very competitive with one another, but they try to network when it's beneficial to them. I think in our industry, there's less of that. I think at the site level, you do see like some, hey, I don't want to necessarily network with my competitor. But from the employee level, I do think there's a huge opportunity there for networking, and we're starting to see it. We're starting to see it with Latinos in clinical research, with the Black women in clinical research. There's a lot of groups out there fostering networking. SOCRA and ACRP do it to some extent, but um, we could do a lot more because there are sites, there are vendors, there are CROs, there are sponsors, and then there are people that want to work in these levels. It's fragmented. The networking's fragmented.
I,
Unlike, let's say, real estate, where, yeah, you may have mortgage lenders and agents, but it's not like they're not networking with each other. So it's a little less fragmented in that sense because everyone's after the same end user, which is the customer. In our case, we're not all after the same people. Like as sites, we're after sponsors and patients, but as a CRA, you're just after your next gig or your next contract. Or as a vendor, you're after CROs to get your product in front of them. So we're all after different things. And that's why I think there is opportunity for networking. We've only scratched the surface because there's not really any cohesive efforts other than Latinos in clinical research, Black pharma, Black women in clinical research. You're starting to see a little bit more of that, but far from ideal.
I see. And so, for you, as someone who is not only a site owner, but also, again, an opportunity generator in our industry, what are your thoughts on, on the diversity and inclusion concept? Because I think it's for
Yeah,
me, it's a struggle, and I say that because, in my opinion, I do believe that it is the most overused phrase in our industry. I think that organizations have to be very, very careful because it can become, another way to have a professional quota, if you will.
hmm,
Um, but I also think though that there is underrepresentation, and
absolutely.
I you know I've been in companies where I know for a fact, I checked every box: African American male, veteran, you know. But there I've been in other companies where the diversity and inclusion, it was present enough to where they didn't have to broadcast it, you know,
Exactly.
and it
Exactly.
wasn't something that, look, Latinos, Black and brown people, we weren't this shiny object to say, look, this is why we're diverse and inclusive, and so, again, being someone who has a fast track program, and you write books and you have a podcast, like, and somebody who's been, in this industry for over 20 years, like, what are your thoughts on that, and what can do you think can be done to improve um, the underrepresentation.
It's huge underrepresentation. So it's a huge issue. Even the FDA acknowledges it,
Yep,
which I mean, they're mandating more minorities be represented in the studies before they approve a particular drug because we don't. I mean, as dangerous. Forget about DE and I and all these idealistic phrases we throw around. Like people can actually die or get very sick if they're taking an approved drug that hasn't been tested on their background. Like it's just common sense. So I think it's everybody can see the obvious need for diversity at the at least at the study participant level. But then it gets tricky because okay, well how do we foster more minority recruitment in studies? Well, one strategy which I actually believe in is sites should hire more minorities because I mean, here's a news flash. Like patients are more comfortable around people that are from their same background. And then it trickles up into okay, what about CRAs? And I actually think CROs have done a great job as far as women in positions of CRAs. You're a male, right? Like as a male CRA, even as a male coordinator, we're minorities. Like it's a female dominated industry. So our industry was ahead in that regard. Maybe it had something to do with the nursing background. Who knows? When it comes to minorities though, we've started to see lately an increase in hiring. But where it matters, Damien, where it matters at the C-suite level, we all know not much has changed. Matter of fact, I saw somebody on Twitter yesterday, a black woman. Immediate follow. I want to get her on. She's in pharma. JPM is having its annual conference this week in San
yep,
Francisco. Biggest conference of the year for pharma. It's where biotechs go to get funding. It's where biotechs go to sell their company to Pfizer or another big pharma. It's
yep.
probably where Shire hooked up the deal for Takeda to buy them, right? She said she didn't see anyone in sight that looked like her. Anyone in sight. These are the conferences that matter. Nothing against SOCRA and ACRP, but these are the workers at those conferences. And we're talking about decision makers at the executive levels. We haven't seen the change yet. And I think real equity in DE&I, the E is equity, is ownership. So until we start seeing more minorities in positions of actual ownership, this is why I'm an advocate for small business. It's the best way to further your career, regardless of your background. That's true equity. So
Yeah.
I'm very passionate about that. I can do an hour on this,
Yeah,
but
me too. Well, for me, I think that too, when we talk DEI, I think that we also have to realize that there's two more, components of it, which one is acceptance and belonging. And I think that, one of the points that you bring up also is like, I think that one of the challenges with minority recruitment, and even I would go as far as to say, hiring diverse candidates, is the fact that I think it's a bigger picture, like in this country, where we tend to be dismissive of certain things because they don't necessarily apply to us. So, for example, people will look at things like the Tuskegee experiment and they'll say, well, that happened in the 70s. And it's like, well, I was born in 76, so,
that
or
happened in your lifetime, man.
yeah, I have relatives, that, were born before then. And I just think that, I think that access, and again, this is why I feel that that you are really important to clinical research, is because through you, you allow people through your podcast, through your books, through LinkedIn, to have the ability to pivot in a way where the fear of clinical research lessens, because I think that that's also a
Hmm.
big, I mean, one of the challenges, in minorities as well, is we don't like to go to the doctors, and it's because, if you go to the
Yeah.
doctors, you're going to find something. So I think that I listen, I know people who are in programs designed for this, but they're the only one that looks like me, you know,
It's
and
perception, though. Perception is a real thing.
it is.
Tuskegee was not a myth, and we don't talk about it enough, I don't think, because it has ramifications. Like you said, that was the 70s, right? You're born when that came out, it was the 70s. It started earlier, but people
Right.
tend to brush it away like, "Oh, no, that was such a long time ago." Those people's grandkids, that generation's grandkids are adults now. They're potential study participants. They don't want to do studies because of real things like this that happened, where it's not a conspiracy theory. Like this actually happened. Their hesitancy to join studies is 100% correct and justifiable. Like this actually happened. You also compare that to Latinos. So like in Mexico, here in the US, like we're not getting into the vaccine, but there's a lot of hesitancy around the vaccine. That's another hour-long podcast.
Yeah.
There's distrust in a sense of corporations. In Mexico, they're not really pushing the vaccine much. Like the media, you're not hearing it. So people there want to get it. They think that the government's trying to prevent them from getting it. So it's
Wow.
all about perception. So this stuff is absolutely correct. All this DE&I stuff boils down to perception, and I mean that's the reality of where we are in 2023.
Yeah, and and you speak about, Mexico. I mean, when when you're taking, whether it's your city training or your ICHGCP training, there's a reason why you learn about the Belmont Report and the Nuremberg codes, and even,
Mhm.
other things that really don't get talked about, like the Willowbrook study. And so these things, they become generationally affixed to our profession. And I think that one thing that for me, I think that one of the resolutions is to really emphasize community engagement. You know, have have platforms like yourself where if people want to learn more about clinical research, have a liaison go out to, the respective clinics in the communities where they're underserved, and, just literally answer any questions that people may have. Because again, I think perception is a huge part of it. I think access is also another part of it, because I mean, I'm
Yep.
sure I think your site is located in Mesa, right? So,
Yeah, Yuma,
oh,
Arizona is super
Yuma,
underserved.
and
Yep.
so I'm sure sometimes patients may drive 3 or 4 hours, or they may not know about Center Watch, or they may not know about these websites that can really be informative with respect to clinical trials. And so I one of the goals, what I would love to do, is to really start something like that, where we develop a network of community engagement people who don't have a corporate feel, because I think that's another part of it. But we become beacons to the benefits of clinical research, and don't shy away. Like, one of the things when I was in Germany, my boss, because I wanted to know, my boss had told me for a long time, Germans were ashamed of their history for obvious reasons, but it's their history. They have to own it. And so what they did was they managed it in a way where it became a teachable moment. And so I think that, while that may also slide into some political things, which, I think that that's the one way that we help increase minority recruitment in studies, as well as, to your point, having the proper representation at all levels, whether it's the CRO, the site, and
Every level.
yeah, every level. Yeah.
And I think I'm hoping, but there's plenty of people that are not relying on hope. They're making it happen. You being one of them. I'm hoping that eventually it will trickle up into the C-suite. I think we will. I think meritocracy is still foundational to this country, and I think if we, like you said, give it access and opportunities to enough people, eventually we will get the outcomes that we're hoping for. But it's going to take a generation to see if that actually pans out or not.
Yeah. And so, as someone who has really dedicated, their life to their profession, like, what's next for you?
Uh, this is my last site, man. This is my last site for sure. I've been running sites since 2005 on accident. Started on accident. Um, it's definitely my last one. It's also my biggest opportunity because it's the first time I've been in an underserved area. Prior to this, I've been in SoCal, so LA, Orange County, Inland Empire. Those are not really underserved. Like, there's plenty of sites out there. If mine don't make it, it doesn't matter. This one, if we don't make it, there's no other research here. I mean, you have the hospital that's like the monopoly in the town, and they do oncology trials. So I moved out here, 5-year plan, build something big, build something worthwhile, build something that provides value to the community, and then either sell it or have someone run it and move back, probably San Diego, but who knows? Could be anywhere. And I really want to focus on biotech next. I'm really starting to get into the science of these kind of things. Um, and I think that's the next stage. If you could get past the funding and the startup, getting the biotechs to not just choose what therapeutic areas to focus on, because that's for the scientists, but getting the biotechs to figure out early before they fail the process, the clinical research process, and improving their chances of succeeding, whether that's through content marketing to get patients in the studies. Do you know how much money these biotechs waste on CROs
Isn't
because
it
they
like,
don't know what they're
it's in the
doing?
billions, right?
Yes, it makes or breaks not just the biotechs and the founders, but the investors who put their money in some of these penny stocks. So, like, maybe 1 out of 20 succeed, But what happens to the other 19? I think that could be reduced. I think those outcomes can be halved. Actually, I think maybe 10 out of those 20 can actually have moderate success. Take the science out of it, just due to clinical trial enrollment, vendor procurement, how to monitor their studies more efficiently using tools like remote monitoring that we discussed, right?
Hmm.
And then also raising awareness on the investor side because they're ignoring retail investors. And I think retail investors are really kind of what makes or breaks some of these stocks. We saw a lot in 2020 with GameStop and some of these other stocks.
Yeah, Bed Bath and
Retail,
Beyond, right?
Bed
Yeah.
Bath and look at this. I mean, AMC, retail investors. We all focus on institutional investors. Those are the people at JP Morgan, but bringing biotech to the retail investors. That's my next. It's kind of ambiguous right now, like my plans, but I can't really articulate it well. But I think kind of what I'm trying to do with clinical research to bring that to biotech space. That's my next decade, probably 2030 and beyond.
Nice. Yeah,
Hopefully,
I
hopefully.
mean, well, the other part too is I think that when you look at the CRO culture, I definitely think that it's interesting because before, there used to be, a handful, but now there's so many CROs, and some CROs are specialized. And I think that what happens from time to time, right, is that you use kind of the homegrown CRA or CRA, I'm sorry, CRO that is niche in phase one, and then
Mhm.
once you have your information, you go to phase two, then you go for the heavy hitters. And I think that that gap is sometimes where the quality is affected. You know,
Yes.
and I think that I mean, you could make the argument too, that some CROs, they have the reputation of becoming mills, right? Where uh, it becomes, quantity over quality, and um, so I think to your point, I think proper CRO utilization is again, it's another avenue that you know.
Or or with these techs, I mean, Viva right here, okay? These tech companies empowering sites and patients, if they actually do, if they actually pull off what their objectives are, which is to make life easier for sites and make life easier for patients at the same time, the real question is, do we still need CROs? And I think that's where, if you talk to a lot of these biotech CEOs, especially the early stage ones, where they may go to CRO XYZ, the big one, which are also publicly traded, they're not really given priority because 19 out of 20 of them are not going to be in business in 5 years. So why would you care? So this is like a common theme. I think can use some disruption.
So, to that point, right, and I'm sure you know this as well, is like, the relationship between sponsor and CRO is kind of like, I need you or I want you, but I don't need you.
Yeah,
You see it all the time, right? Like where, because I mean, listen, I don't know the percentages, but I would love to know how many CROs are still using, or sponsors rather, are using an FSP model. Because I've seen a lot of stuff on Biospace where, like, I think it was like, like Nectar and BMS, like, they ceased, their program, and and all of these mergers have ceased. And it's interesting because I've been in companies where, as a consultant, where it's like, well, we're having a shift. We want to bring things in house. We don't
yeah.
want to deal with we don't want to deal with the with the consultants. We'd rather just develop in house CRAs, and then you get to these other scenarios where they want contractors and they don't want W-2s because, like you said, their business plan is probably 3 years at best.
At best, I mean, we're about to enter that phase now
Yep.
of these biotechs are either going to go out of business or get bought out for pennies on the dollar by big pharma. Big pharma's going to come out of this recession. We're about to be in a recession, stronger, bigger than ever. But I think by 2030, it's going to be a next cycle, with genomics, wearable, all this stuff's going to come out. MABs, mRNA, all right?
Yeah.
I mean, feel how you want about it. There's potential there. So I think that's going to be the next generation where they're going to really think twice. Like, do I need a CRO? Can I do this in house? And this is why I think we actually need more generalists in this space who understand how the industry functions on a high level. Because what I mean, these any study needs patients. They need PIs that know what they're doing, right? They need basic things like EDC, biostats, and what typically derails these trials is lack of patient accrual. Because whether the science works or doesn't work, you're going to find out sooner rather than later if you have good patient accrual, which means saving $1 million a day, what the average clinical trial costs.
So then would you suggest, how a lot of times, I always tell people that, listen, having experience is one thing, because a lot of people will say, I want to have 20 years at IQVIA. And it's like, well, the data will dictate that, And so, do you think things like having sooner interim analyses or having sooner, data safety reviews, that those things will help trim
Yeah,
or be proactive in minimizing loss?
yes. Failing faster. I mean, every biotech take the market cap that they have. If the average clinical trial cost, and this was before COVID, but the average clinical trial cost $1 million a day.
Yep.
All right, if that's delayed due to patient recruitment or lack of data being entered in a timely manner, lack of review, that's $1 million a day. It adds up. They have other things in the pipeline they want to do, but they don't want to piss off their investors by doing everything at once and then running out of money and ending up with nothing. So the faster they can fail, the sooner they can start their next thing. There's no shortage of brilliant scientists at these companies. Problem is, these scientists don't know the first thing about site procurement, how to speak to a patient, how to get coordinators up to speed, how to show PIs that yes, if they start a site on their real world patients that they could actually be financially viable. You need somebody or some new group that hasn't been formed yet, like a new version of a CRO, to connect all these stakeholders.
I see. So my last question is, I know, our industry is so exciting. And so what's your take on psychedelic research? Because it just seems like,
Ooh.
man, it's here, right?
It's here. It's here. It's a lot harder to do than you think. So only a few type of sites are actually positioned to do it properly. Um, there's several specialized CROs that do this. I've actually just talked to one a few months back because we have a psychiatrist in Yuma, but he's the traditional office. You come in. There's nothing nice about the office. It's just a medical office. What they want for these psychedelics is almost like a resort because they don't want the patients to freak out when they're in a trip and say, "Oh, I'm in a doctor's office. Here's like a waiting room." They want them to be like in a room, like a spa, where it's like an experience. And when they come back to reality from wherever they went, right, that they're not freaking out. Like, oh, okay, now I'm in a relaxed place. Not to mention the DEA license and all that other stuff you need too. So it's a lot harder to pull off at the site level, but there are sites that are positioning themselves. There's plenty of medical spas and there's plenty of doctors who have medical spas in addition to their private practices, even here in Yuma. So you can. Problem is, it is still clinical research at the end of the day. So you got to show them that the money is worth it, the ROI of converting your office into a medical spa is there to do studies because we're still early in the psychedelic research space.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting because I think that, just some of the, preliminary data out there. I mean, it could be a game changer, especially, against SSRIs. That kind of, I mean, if you know anything about CNS, there really isn't, it's pretty much more of a cocktail that people get put on, and it's kind of,
Hmm.
A drug for a drug, if you will. So, for Valium, you may end up getting Cogentin, and those type of things. So I think it'll be interesting to see not so much the clinical trials, but how it would be marketed, because I think that it would want to avoid the cannabis thing, where, it becomes, instead of it being for medicinal purposes. And I'm not saying that it's not, but I mean, look, I live in Compton. I can go to like 50, men-made cannabis places and get something. So I think that it'll be interesting to see the
You can get it
marketing.
delivered to you before this interview's over.
Right, and I think too that to your point about the resort feel, I think that one thing about that is probably because you you don't want the trigger, right? I mean, you know what I mean? So if
Hmm.
somebody is in an environment where the Grateful Dead is playing, or Jamiroquai or Coombrang or something like that, and the room is like earth tones and things like that, I think it does provide a certain level of calm and things like that. So I
Safe
think,
landing.
yeah, and I think so. I think it will be interesting to see if that model ends up being like the model for CNS as a whole.
Depends. I mean, the ketamine stuff that they were started working on since 2015, and you combine that with Alzheimer's and schizophrenia, they still don't have any answers for Alzheimer's or schizophrenia. I think wearables actually playing a big role into that, like EEGs. I think
Yeah,
we're going to see a revolution of EEGs you can take home and you can get some data, which if you're given enough data, run through an algorithm, you can tell which medication has a better likelihood of working on which patient because we're all different. I think that's gonna start happening this decade. Actually, we actually have a study that's very similar to what I just described, starting soon. So I think that stuff's already happening, and I think we're gonna have more customized solutions for psychiatric patients.
nice, nice. And so, listen, I know we have what, about 6 minutes left, right? So, um,
We're gonna have to do part two and part three.
yeah, yeah. I mean, because I have so many questions, and like, like we started this podcast off. This was kind of a last minute thing, but again,
Yeah,
I am so grateful, for this opportunity, because, you know, oftentimes when we're doing work, we're looking at it as something that we love to do, and we look at it as a way of like, to it's our joy, right? And I don't know, and maybe you do know, like, your impact. You know what I mean? I mean, just by the mere fact that that you started, a CRA Fast Track Academy, and there's people, and I've seen, people, their post, I just got a great job as a CRA, or I got a great job as a study coordinator. That's I I would love to learn more about how to do that. I mean, I have
mm,
mentees, and there's people that that I've worked with along the way, and we share information and things like that. But like, and it's not so much about having like the platform, but it's really, I think that this is vital to our industry, because again, I'm sure as well, like, a lot of times there are fantastic sites, right? But it's just that how they get their foot in the clinical research door is always the biggest obstacle. And so I think that what you're doing, and like I said, even Dr. Hazen, uh,
love her.
yeah, 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 yeah. I mean, listen, I mean, she remembered me from a decade ago and was like, yeah,
And she
let's
was
work.
right about a lot of stuff where
Yes, she was.
even me in 2020, I'm super open-minded and anti-establishment. She was telling me some stuff. I was like, no, you sound like you're crazy. If I didn't know you, Dr. Azen, I would think you're crazy. And turns out 2023, she's right about most of it.
Yeah, and like I said, we wrote, some, I helped her write a couple protocols, and like you said, it's one of those things, like, that's what, like brilliant, that's what that is. And she was using science. You know what I mean? She wasn't using like the media. She wasn't using, conspiracy
So
theories.
what she did, if you scale it up to the size of a biotech, a startup biotech, is what I think you can scale up and create a platform for startup biotechs to emulate. She's
Yeah,
like the rudimentary model. That's my plan for 2030 and beyond.
nice. Yeah, I told her she is like the Yoda of our industry because
Oh, she is.
you know what I mean? I mean, again, and listen, there were a couple times where she, would post things on social media, and people had some very strong stuff to
I
say.
saw. I saw all of them. I may not have commented, but I read them.
Yeah, and I liked a couple of her posts, and all of a sudden I was getting these direct messages like, you know, how could you like that? Like,
When we stop questioning, first of all, nobody knows anything still.
right.
Still, mRNA is a potential platform game changer. We don't know much about it yet, even though what half the world has been vaccinated at least once with it. But this is
Yeah.
the rudimentary form. Like, you could debate how it was executed and all that, but nobody knows is the answer. But if we stop questioning because we assume, okay, no, only these people have the answers, only these people should be listened to, we're back to Tuskegee again. Like, it's the same mentality that got us into this mess to begin with.
And I think to that point is, what she did is she was brilliant in removing opinion out of it and made everything literally indefensible. I mean, everything was solely about the science. And I think to your point, if more people looked at it that way versus, well, this doesn't make sense because there's not a political angle on it. Her stuff was solely about the
Mhm.
science and solely on, a lot of her, I mean, people don't realize it. She was what, like the first like female MD in GI or something like that, like
Yep.
graduate from like UF and stuff like that. So
Yep.
I mean, so she wasn't like some, like mega preacher or something like that just had this wild theory. I mean, her and her sister, they dedicated their lives,
Yeah.
to
And you
so
could easily replace the word political with forced compliance for maximizing profits.
exactly, exactly. Yeah, and I mean, and like I said, trust me, I mean, there was a lot of stuff when she was writing those protocols and generally, I mean, she was like literally using her own money, for a
I
lot of it.
know. I
She was
know.
using
We both worked with her
yeah.
without realizing we're working together.
Yeah.
That's why when Alexandra wrote that post I was like, I know this guy's name. I need to click and see who he is. And then I went to message you and I saw we already had threads going. I'm like, oh shoot. I've
Yeah.
been talking to Damien.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I think 2000. I think maybe it might have been like 2011, 2012. I think maybe
I don't,
I
it
sent
goes
you,
back.
you were like, man, you have like a ton of oncology experience. Like, let me look at this because there's no way you shouldn't be, not without a job, so on and so forth. So,
Yeah.
I've always been, a fan, and this was, like I said, I mean, I feel like, I feel like I've made it.
Oh man, no. I mean, I'm lucky to get the chance to interview you. And honestly, we didn't even scratch the surface of your career.
Yeah,
So I want to do that next because there's a lot to unpack from your career. Like you said, the sacrifice, the things you've learned, the advice you can give to others, and we can integrate that to some of the higher ideals, like getting more people into the industry and giving more people the at bats that they need.
yeah, yeah. And so I know we're right at 11 o'clock. And so
Thank you,
listen, sir,
Damien.
thank you. And again, anyone who's watching this podcast, please follow my guy. He's a good, not only is he excellent in our profession, but he's just a good guy to know. So, again, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for taking time also to speak to my mentees as well, because I know that
Man.
you've been chopping it up with them as well. So
Thank you, Damien. Links to Damien's LinkedIn underneath the profile. Everybody like, subscribe, comment, share, go follow. Thank you again, Damien. We'll do part two soon. Bye
sure.
bye.
All righty. Take care.